everyone, this is Vandal. If you are new to my channel, welcome! I play video games while I tell you a true crime story. This is a story about a man who was one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. Listener discretion is advised. This story is about Richard Ramirez. Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker. His reign of terror began in the summer of 1984 and lasted until his capture in August of 1985. In this true crime story, we will delve into Ramirez's life and the murders he committed, as well as the events that led to his eventual capture. Ramirez was born on February 29, 1960 in El Paso, Texas. He was the youngest of 5 children, and his childhood was far from idyllic. His father was a former police officer who was prone to fits of rage and often physically abused his family. Ramirez was also a victim of abuse at the hands of his older cousin Miguel. Miguel had returned from fighting in the Vietnam War and had become fixated on Satanism. There have been reports of a strained relationship between the two. It has been reported that Miguel suffered from PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, and became increasingly violent and abusive towards his family. Ramirez's family has stated that Miguel was a negative influence on Ramirez and may have contributed to his violent tendencies. Ramirez was said to have idolized Miguel, who introduced him to drugs and weapons at a young age. It has been suggested that Miguel may have even taken Ramirez on nighttime missions to hunt and kill animals, which could have desensitized Ramirez to violence. However, the exact nature of the relationship between Ramirez and his cousin Miguel is not entirely clear, and some of the information about the relationship may be based on hearsay and speculation rather than verifiable facts. Ramirez's early life was marked by a series of disturbing incidents. When he was 12 years old, he was present when Miguel shot his wife in the face during an argument. The incident had a profound effect on Ramirez, and he began to withdraw from his family and turn to drugs and petty crimes. Ramirez dropped out of high school and began to roam the country, committing a series of burglaries and other crimes. He eventually made his way to California, where he began to commit more violent crimes. In 1984, he began a brutal killing spree that terrorized the state. Ramirez's first victim was Jenny Vincow, a 79-year-old widow who lived in an apartment in Glassell Park. Ramirez broke into her apartment, raped her, then stabbed her to death. Over the next few months, he continued to target vulnerable men and women, often breaking into their homes in the middle of the night and attacking them while they slept. March 17, 1985, Ramirez shot Dale Okazaki, a 34-year-old accountant, in the head in her home in Rosemead, California. She died of her injuries. Also on March 17th of 85, Ramirez broke into the home of Sei Lin Yu, a 30-year-old Chinese immigrant, and shot her to death in front of her husband. March 27th of 85, Ramirez broke into the home of Vincent Cesara, a 64-year-old retired plumber, and shot him to death. Cesara's wife Maxine was also shot, but survived. On May 14th of 85, Ramirez broke into the home of William Doy, a 66-year-old war veteran, and beat him to death with a tire iron. May 29th, Ramirez broke into the home of Mabel Bell, an 84-year-old widow, and beat her to death with a hammer. July 2nd, Ramirez broke into the home of Mary Louise Cannon, 75-year-old widow, beat her to death with a lamp. July 7th of 85, Ramirez broke into the home of Joyce Lucille Nelson, a 61-year-old retired librarian, and beat her to death with a tire iron. Also on July 7th of 85, Ramirez broke into the home of Sophie Dickman, a 63-year-old retired nurse, and beat her to death with a hammer. July 20th of 85, he broke into the home of Layla Needing, an 80-year-old widow, and beat her to death with a lamp. Also on July 20th, Maxon Needing, Leela's husband, and beat him to death with a lamp. August 8th of 1985, Ramirez broke into the home of Chiana Rong Kovaneth, a 32-year-old jewelry store owner, and shot him to death. Ramirez's crimes were particularly brutal. He often shot or bludgeoned his victims before mutilating their bodies. He also left behind bizarre clues such as pentagrams and other satanic symbols, and taunted the police and media with letters and phone calls. Despite an intense manhunt, Ramirez managed to evade capture for over a year. He was very difficult to capture for several reasons. He didn't have a specific victim type. Ramirez's victim ranged in age, gender, and ethnicity, which made it harder for investigators to identify a pattern. He didn't leave consistent evidence. Ramirez was known for wearing gloves and changing his weapons, which made it hard to link him to the crimes through DNA or ballistic evidence. He was also mobile. Ramirez would travel long distances to commit his crimes, which made it harder for law enforcement agencies to coordinate and share information. He was also unpredictable. Ramirez would strike at random times and locations, which made it difficult for police to predict where he might strike next. He had a wide range of criminal behavior. In addition to murder, Ramirez committed burglary, rape, and other crimes, which made it hard to narrow down the investigation. It wasn't until August of 1985 that he was finally caught. The break-in case came when he attempted to steal a car in East Los Angeles. The car's owner, 25-year-old woman named Maria Hernandez, saw Ramirez and recognized him from the media coverage of the Night Stalker case. Hernandez screamed for help, and a group of neighbors chased Ramirez down and held him until police arrived. Ramirez was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder, rape, and burglary. Ramirez's trial was a media sensation, and he became a cult figure among some young people who were drawn to his satanic image. Despite overwhelming evidence against him, Ramirez refused to show any remorse for his crimes. He often flashed satanic symbols and shouted out during his trial. In 1989, Ramirez was found guilty on 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. He was sentenced to death. While he was on death row at San Quentin State Prison in California, he got married. In 1996, Ramirez married a 41-year-old freelance magazine editor named Doreen Leoy. The two had corresponded for several years. Doreen stated she believed Ramirez was innocent of his crimes he was convicted of committing. They were married in a visiting room at the prison. He died of cancer while awaiting execution in 2013. Some of Ramirez's known medical issues included epilepsy, which is a neurological disorder characterized by seizures. He was diagnosed with epilepsy at a young age and reportedly experienced seizures throughout his life. Of course, substance abuse. He was known to abuse drugs and alcohol, and this addiction was likely contributed to his erratic behavior and violent tendencies. Ramirez contracted hepatitis C while in prison, which is a viral infection that can cause liver damage and other health complications. He was also diagnosed with personality disorder that included elements of antisocial personality disorder, which is characterized by lack of empathy, disregard for the rights of others, and tendency towards impulsive behavior. It's worth noting that Ramirez's medical issues are not an excuse for his heinous crimes, and he was ultimately held accountable for his actions in the court of law. The Night Stalker's crimes left a lasting impact on the state of California and the country as a whole. Ramirez's brutal methods and bizarre behavior made him one of the most terrifying serial killers of all time. His capture and eventual conviction were a testament to the dedication of law enforcement officials and the bravery of the victims and their families. There have been a few movies and series made about Richard Ramirez. There was a 4-part true crime documentary series on Netflix called The Night Stalker, The Hunt for a Serial Killer, that explores the crimes of Richard Ramirez. It takes a deep dive into Ramirez's crimes. It also features interviews with detectives who worked on the case, survivors of Ramirez's attacks, and family members of his victims. It will keep you on the edge of your seat. They actually show the scene where he was captured by the neighbors, and that part's pretty cool. They also featured him in American Horror Story 1984 in the 5th episode. In the show, Ramirez is depicted as a ghost who haunts the campgrounds, and Ramirez targets the counselors, taunting and terrorizing them with his supernatural powers. Throughout the episode, the show intertwines actual footage and news reports of Ramirez with the fictional storyline, emphasizing the real-life horror and fear that the Night Stalker inflicted on his victims and the public. The episode concludes with the counselors defeating Ramirez and sending him back to hell, providing a sense of closure to the fictional storyline while acknowledging the real-life tragedy. There was also a movie, The Night Stalker, made in 2016, Night Stalker in 2009, and Manhunt: Search for the Night Stalker in 1989. Overall, these movies and TV shows aim to shed light on the heinous crimes of Richard Ramirez and the impact they had on the victims and their families, as well as the wider community. If you haven't checked these out, I definitely recommend them. By the way, this story was requested by Patrick. If you all have any true crime stories you would like to hear about, please comment below and I'd be happy to look into them. Again, this is Vandal. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do. I'd really appreciate it, and see you guys next time.